Buckle up, boys and girls. My buddy and I just experienced some grade A creepy shit while on a road trip to Red Rocks in Colorado. I write a lot of things down anyway, and so I figured I might as well post this story here and see what you guys think. So who here has used AirBnB? I think I've used it no less than 20 times. All great experiences. Up until this point. I need to go ahead and preface this by saying that, while I could send you a link to this house, it wouldn't do any good because it's not there anymore, but we'll get to that. So a few weeks ago, me and my buddy John saw that one of our favorite bands was going to be playing at Red Rocks. We've been talking about making a trip up there for years now. We live in Florida, and the timing seemed perfect. Both of our wives are pregnant, and the thought process was that if we were going to make this trip, it was now or never. The drive was going to take about 24 hours, so we decided we would drive until about midnight after we got off work, find a place to crash, and then finish the drive the next day. I immediately hopped onto Airbnb and started looking for somewhere cool to stay. While I'm scrolling through potential places to stay in Tennessee, since it's about 8 hours from Tampa, I come across this majestic plantation-style house. The pictures look amazing, and it only costs $30 a night to stay there. $30 gets you the upstairs suite, complete with its own bathroom. You can tell that it sits on a tall hill in the woods, overlooking a fairly large valley. It's a sprawling 2-story house, white wood, with ferns hanging off the wraparound porch. It looked like something from To Kill a Mockingbird, and I immediately sent John screenshots. Dude, we've gotta stay here. He texts back, equally enthused. He does point out, however, that the place has no reviews. Now, in my book, this is an Airbnb no-no, but the place seems so cool, and it's so cheap. And what can I say? I was feeling spontaneous, so I booked it. You can't beat $15 per person. We would play rock, paper, scissors to see who got the bed when we got there. A couple weeks go by, and the day of our trip finally arrives. We both get off work at 4 and meet up, already packed and ready to go. We knew that the trip from Tampa to Tennessee would take 8 hours, so we didn't waste any time getting on the interstate. By the time we make it into Tennessee, it's approaching midnight. When we get off the interstate and head towards the address, it's completely dark out. It doesn't get this dark in Tampa, and apparently the town we were heading in isn't overly concerned with things like streetlights. The cell service finally dwindled to nothing about 50 minutes after getting off the interstate. Surprise, surprise. But John was smart enough to screenshot the route beforehand so that we wouldn't get lost. An absolute 5-star wingman there, ladies and gentlemen. We navigate through some serious back roads, eventually leaving the pavement behind for a long gravel driveway. It didn't stick out at the time as much as it does in retrospect, but the mailbox was actually laying on the ground, causing us to miss the turn on the first pass. Only after getting out in the pitch of darkness and examining the fading address stickers by the light of John's phone, did we determine that we were indeed on the right track. We continue up the driveway, if not for a little more skepticism than before. It winds on for, I shit you not, 12 minutes through some mountainous territory. At times the grade became serious enough that I thought I might have to put my 4Runner into 4-wheel drive. We finally come around a bend in the drive that opens up onto a large field. In the distance, I see the house briefly as my high beams swing across it during the turn. I think that was the first time that I really became concerned that something wasn't right. In the brief seconds that my headlights illuminated the house, it was obvious that the pictures had been deceiving. It was without a doubt the same house, but it clearly hadn't been cared for in some time. Half of the shutters were hanging off. The white paint was dirty and chipping. The ferns from the picture had long since withered away. My car continues to turn, and the house is once again obscured by the darkness as we make our way around the perimeter of the field in front of it. I remember John saying something along the lines of, "What the fuck have you got us into?" as we pulled to a stop in front of a massive old willow tree that served as the end of the driveway. It honestly looked like some ancient centennial in the semi-darkness. The house stands about 30 yards away from the end of the driveway. I notice with relief that it does have electricity. At the side door, there is one of those old-fashioned yellow light bulbs, casting a sickish glow onto the surrounding bushes and the sidewalk leading to the driveway. I turn off the car and try to lighten the mood by saying something my grandfather always used to say, "Home again, home again." John casts me a sideways glance and smirks. "We could leave, find a Motel 6, or just take turns driving." At this point, my creep meter was quietly pinging at around 6 out of 10, just on the threshold of uncomfortable, but not quite there yet. Definitely not Motel 6 uncomfortable, that's for sure. "Come on, John. Where's your sense of adventure?" I say as I swing my door open and hop out. My feet make a scrunch sound as they meet the gravel, and I'm immediately struck by how loud the sound of the summer bugs are. We grab our backpack and pillows and make our way down the very old sidewalk toward that yellow light. For some reason, it reminded me of a hospital. The instructions said check in whenever. The key will be under the mat. John stoops and lifts the corner of the ancient mat. Underneath is a skeleton key, roughly the length of my hand, and it was pretty cool. He stands up with it, and we just sort of stare at each other for a second. The door has large frosted windows, and we can see that it's pitch black inside. He shakes his head at me and sticks the key in the lock. The deadbolt makes an ungodly loud sound that I swear echoes. I reached past John and pushed the door inward. The air that blows out as the door opens is completely stale. It smells like the air has been sitting for ages. I need to be clear that it doesn't stink. It's just thick with the smell of disuse, if that makes any sense. John gestures for me to go first, so I do. If I'm being honest, I think at this point my creep meter had probably edged up to a 7, but yet still not Motel 6 uncomfortable. The place just felt so empty. I shined my cell phone light around in front of me as John follows me through the door. We're in a large kitchen now, and it was huge. He gently eases the door shut. Every footstep sounded like a squeaky explosion on the weathered hardwood, and John shushes me as I make my way towards the counter on the other side of the room. I can see a piece of printer paper illuminated there. My stomach drops as I get closer. Now, you're gonna think I'm making this up, but I swear to God, it's a piece of printer paper with the words, "Make yourself at home," scrawled on it in blue crayon, and it honestly looks like it was written by a toddler. Each letter is blocky, crooked, and 2 inches tall. I turn and look at John as he begins to read it over my shoulder, and I immediately recognize his "nope the fuck out of here" expression. His eyes were huge at this point. Dude, what the fuck? He's looking over my shoulder now. I snap my head around in the direction of his gaze. What? What is it? He's looking out of a huge window. Through it, the tree line is dimly illuminated by the hazy yellow glow from the bulb outside the door. I just saw something move out there. I swear. Something just passed at the edge of the woods. I strain my eyes, but see only the trees in their shifting shadows, and it seemed like the wind was picking up. If the blue crayon writing hadn't done it, John's outburst had. I was officially Motel 6 uncomfortable. Let's get out of here. We can find another place to stay. Sleeping in the car would be better than this. John is 100% on board. We make our way out of the kitchen and let the door slam. No longer worrying about being quiet. I'm actually jogging by the time we get halfway down the sidewalk, my backpack bouncing awkwardly. John beats me back to the car, and I see his shoulders slump as he slows down. "What?" I ask, And then I see the tires. All 4 tires are completely flat. And that's when the screaming started.
Martin, company's here.
John and I were frozen in place. Our eyes were locked together. We had both been so transfixed by the discovery of the flat tires that the sound of this woman's frantic shouts were absolutely terrifying.
Martin.
My stomach felt like a twisted knot. John was facing away from the house, and over his shoulder I could see what appeared to be an old woman in a white nightgown. She was barefoot and was pacing along the edge of the woods where we had just come from, barely visible in the edge of the dim yellow light. My eyes widened as she leaned towards the trees and raised her hands to her mouth.
Martin, it's time.
John found his voice. Shit, Sean. What is she doing? What is she doing out here in the middle of the night? Shh, we need to keep quiet. We had both ducked behind the car, but I doubted that she'd be able to see us here in the darkness anyway. I peeped over the hood towards the sound. She was walking rapidly back and forth, slightly hunched over, staring into the dark trees. The thought of her lurking in the shadows while we hurried out of the house sent chills down my spine. Just as I thought this, she screamed once more, her voice cracking with the strain. She paused for just a moment, as if she was listening, and then disappeared back into the woods. This old lady literally just ran into the dark woods. No flashlight, no shoes, nothing. The sound of the night insects seemed to swell in the absence of her screams. Have you ever been in an extremely high-pressure situation? The adrenaline rush does make it feel like time really does slow down. In that moment of surreality, 2 facts pushed themselves to the front of my mind, bright red and almost tangible. We had lost cell service miles before reaching the house. Driving out of here in our car was not an option. The tires weren't just low, the rims were resting on the gravel driveway. That wouldn't work. No sir. We wouldn't even get 10 feet. John seemed to have reached a similar conclusion and raised a fantastic counterpoint. I bet they have a phone in there, like a house phone. Old people love landlines. True, but I saw one glaring issue. I really don't want to go back inside. We don't even know if it's empty. She could be back any time, I said. I noticed a pickup truck parked near a shed near the other side of the house. It looked ancient and rusted, but all the tires seemed to be full of air. Finally, there was some potential. Let's go check that truck for keys. John nodded, and I was already running, dropping my backpack off as I took off. I wasn't sure who Martin was, and I honestly wanted things to stay that way. We cleared the yard in 15 seconds, and the house had now obscured our view from the woods, where the old woman had disappeared. I jerked the handle and swung it open with a groan. John was on the passenger side and already had his cell phone light on. Together we searched for the keys, above the visors, in the cup holders, every nook and cranny, and we found nothing. Either of us knew how to hotwire a car, so we needed a new plan. Okay, I said. I vote we run for it. John opened his mouth to protest, and I talked louder. You saw that lady. She's completely batshit. She slashed our fucking tires, and now she's running to get help. She could come back at any time. I know, John said. But you have to remember, we basically drove up a mountain to get here, and I don't remember seeing a single car after we got off the interstate. It could be hours before we find somebody, and that nutjob could just run us down in her truck. A good point. The prospect of wandering in the dark for hours loomed ominously, so I relented. Fine, but we have to go now if we're going. And then we were running again, aiming for that sickish yellow glow near the kitchen door, the air rushing past my ears. As we got closer, I could see the spot where the woman had run into the trees. Nothing there but darkness now. Despite our rush, we paused for a moment outside the door to peer through the frosted glass. It was still pitch black dark. I took a deep breath and pushed the door in, and again we were met with the smell of air that has been sitting for ages. The kitchen seemed to yawn backwards into the deeper darkness, and my cell phone light swept over the countertops in search of a phone or a cord. John checked the other side, and we met near the back wall. Nothing, I whispered. John nodded in consensus. Outside the window that faced the woods, I saw only the empty yard and the dark tree line shifting in the breeze. Let's check one more room, and let's get the fuck out of here. The door out of the kitchen opened onto a long hallway. The other end of it was just visible at the edge of my flashlight's beam. My heart pounded in my ears, and I willed my legs to move forward with considerable effort. I got to the end of the hallway and suddenly stopped. John bumped into me and actually pushed me further into the room. I leaned back to try to escape from what I was seeing, but it did no good. I felt like my legs were about to give. Every wall was covered in thick, black writing, symbols I had never seen before, symbols that I had seen before. My name. But one word stuck out, written on the floor, written on the damn ceiling, in that same childlike scrawl. It stated Martin repeatedly, over and over again, and that's when I started to scream, and so did John. And as I began to voice out the word run, I realized that a third voice joined us. Her ancient, gray face was pressed against the window, black eyes darting back and forth as she cackled. Our eyes met, and she was laughing and screaming and foaming at the mouth. Oh God, Martin, he's coming. And she was sobbing and laughing and screaming, and her face was twisted in glee and agony as she smashed through the window and kept screaming as the blood began to flow.
Martin is here.
And my legs were moving, and the breath left my lungs in spurts as I followed John back through the kitchen door and into the yard. And oh God, why was it so bright out here in the middle of the night? We ran down the driveway and into the woods, and we ran until we couldn't anymore, and then we ran some more. John was shaking me. The sun was finally starting to shine. A truck was finally coming. Now it was time to get up. The fog lifted a bit, and I saw John running towards the road with his arms out. The kid looked 17 at the most. I heard him say he had a room, and I stumbled out of the culvert in which I had apparently been lying in. The clock on his dash said 7:12. When the police finally got there, the house was on fire and had already burned most of the way down. When John and I recounted the story, they reacted with visible skepticism, and I honestly can't blame them really. Nothing was unusual at the scene, definitely no bodies. I still don't know who the old lady was, or Martin for that matter. They told us that the house had been abandoned for as long as they could remember. We're both fine, for the most part. With all that to say, please be careful when using AirBnB. Most of the ones that have a few decent reviews are probably safe, but do me a favor, stay away from any listing that has no reviews. If you enjoyed this episode, please comment. Any feedback is totally welcome. And please give it a like or dislike. The choice is in your hands. And last but not least, always remember, I am the words that keep the birds humming. Join me.